They say if you stay quiet long enough, you will hear the moment your career dies. For me, it happened at exactly 12:02 p.m., under the cold hum of fluorescent lights, while a man who could not spell algorithm tried to justify firing the woman who built the system he barely understood. My name is Rachel Keller. I am 36 years old, a systems architect, and until recently, I spent the last 12 years and 4 months of my life working for Voltrix Systems, a Denver-based tech logistics firm that, before everything came crashing down, was worth almost $1 billion. I was the brain behind its infrastructure, the silent spine holding up its entire digital skeleton. I am not one for drama, but trust me when I say this story is soaked in ego, betrayal, and a tiny taste of revenge. I am originally from Tucson, Arizona, born and raised under desert skies and endless sun. I moved to Colorado with nothing but a suitcase, a laptop, and a heart full of ambition. I joined Voltrix as a junior engineer back in 2012, when it was still a mid-tier player. I worked weekends, pulled all-nighters, designed frameworks from scratch, and patched disasters before anyone even noticed they existed. If you tracked a package through Voltrix or watched a delivery drone land on your porch in record time, that was my code keeping things alive. I never asked for the spotlight. I did the work because I believed in it. I believed in building things that lasted. Turns out, I was the only one who did. The morning it happened, I should have known something was off. The meeting invite was vague, just a quick lunch with leadership in the glass conference room next to the cafeteria. I walked in wearing my Voltrix hoodie and thinking it was another project discussion. My team was already seated, but no laptops, no projectors, no talking, just awkward smiles and the kind of silence that tastes like betrayal. At the head of the table sat Jordan Pierce, our newly appointed Chief Innovation Officer. He was 29, fresh from a marketing job at a wellness app, and also, conveniently, the son of our CEO, Richard Pierce, a man I had not seen in months. Jordan smiled like a man who thought charisma was a substitute for competence. He leaned back, fingers laced, and said, "Rachel, first off, thank you for everything you've done for the company. But Voltrix is entering a new era. We are refreshing our culture, innovating the team." He paused as if delivering poetry, then added, "And unfortunately, that means saying goodbye to some legacy systems." The room was silent. My team stared at him in disbelief. One even dropped their fork. Jordan then looked straight at me smirking and said, "You are brilliant, Rachel, but brilliant can also be outdated, like dial-up modems. You feel me?" No, I did not feel him. I sat there stunned for a few seconds, not because I was shocked I was being let go. There had been whispers, rumors, a shift in tone ever since Jordan took over. But to be fired like this, in public, over lunch, in front of the people I mentored, trained, and fought for, that was not just unprofessional. It was cruel. Jordan had no technical background, no vision beyond buzzwords, and no understanding of what the company was actually built on. He was playing startup dress-up with his father's company and treating people's careers like pieces on a whiteboard. I did not cry, I did not shout, but I did smile, just slightly, because Jordan had no idea what he had just triggered. You see, years ago, after surviving 3 rounds of executive nonsense, I built something into the Voltrix system, a failsafe, not for revenge, not even for protection, just a precaution against the exact kind of arrogance now sitting across from me. It was my way of saying, if you are going to replace the engine, maybe learn how to drive first. As I stood up and gathered my things, Jordan offered a condescending nod. "No hard feelings, right?" I paused at the door, looked at my team one last time and replied, "Not yet." Then I walked out, quietly but not defeated. Because the one thing Jordan did not understand about systems is that they do not collapse all at once. They crack slowly, silently, until one wrong move pulls the wrong thread, and by then, it is already too late. Jordan thought he had won. That smirk he wore as I walked out the door said everything. To him, I was just another obstacle removed, a piece of outdated hardware tossed aside to make room for his shiny, rebranded vision. What he did not know, what he never even bothered to ask, was that 5 years ago, I saw this coming. Maybe not him specifically, but someone like him, someone with a last name instead of a resume. Someone who would march into a system they did not build, assume it was theirs, and start yanking wires without checking where they led. That is why I created the protocol. I called it the Citadel Lock. It was not some evil trap or backdoor scheme. It was a security safeguard, a stability anchor buried deep in the operating core of Voltrix's infrastructure. The company had begun expanding into defense contracts around that time, secure logistics for military supply chains, emergency response, even space mission materials. Systems like that do not just need to work, they need to be protected. From outside attacks, yes, but more often, from inside stupidity. And I had already seen how reckless some of the executives could be when chasing short-term wins. The Citadel Lock was invisible by design. It was built to activate silently if certain critical conditions were met: unauthorized code deployments, executive override without compliance review, or sudden removal of top-level engineers. Once triggered, it started a 6-hour countdown. During that window, only 2 people could reverse it: the CEO and myself. Dual validation, no shortcuts, no workarounds. If either of us was gone, the system began its failsafe sequence. It was all written in clean, efficient code, buried beneath layers of routine processes, where no casual eye would ever think to look. I never told anyone about it. Not because I was hiding something, but because the people who needed to know would have never understood its purpose. Jordan definitely never understood. The moment he revoked my credentials, the Citadel Lock quietly activated. No alarms, no pop-ups, no flashy warnings. Just a silent log entry and a quiet timer ticking down in the background. From that moment on, Voltrix systems had exactly 6 hours until every major operational node locked itself into a frozen state, logistics halted, client access blocked, internal dashboards inaccessible. It was not designed to destroy anything. It was simply meant to stop everything until the people in charge got their heads on straight, or until the system could be reset, if they still had access to someone who knew how. But they had fired that person, over lunch, with a smug metaphor about dial-up modems. It would be easy to paint myself as a villain here. Some might say it was sabotage. But let me be very clear. I did not sabotage anything. I built a safeguard. I did not set it off. They did. They broke the chain of trust and triggered the mechanism. All I did was walk away, as quietly as they asked me to. And in doing so, I gave them a chance, a very narrow window, to realize their mistake, to fix it before it became irreversible. But knowing Jordan, I doubted he would even notice until it was far too late. People like him are not trained to see warning signs. They are trained to see only what flatters them. He would probably spend the afternoon celebrating, talking about how he was cleaning house and modernizing leadership. He would probably hold a company-wide meeting and throw out flashy new ideas without realizing the back end was counting down to 0. Meanwhile, the system he thought he controlled was already preparing to lock him out of every decision he thought he had the right to make. As I drove home that afternoon, the sky was clearing and the rain had stopped. My phone was silent. No apology calls, no second thoughts. I did not expect any. I had built the protocol not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. Because sooner or later, someone always tries to cut corners in the name of progress. And when that person holds power they did not earn, they start thinking they are immune to consequences. The Citadel Lock was not revenge. It was accountability. And now it was doing exactly what it was meant to do. The Citadel Lock was never meant to punish anyone. It was meant to protect the system from the exact kind of reckless power shift that had just taken place. Once activated, it gave a 6-hour grace period. That window was not generous, but it was fair. It gave enough time for either the CEO or myself to intervene, authorize a rollback, and prevent the lockdown from going live. But I already knew neither one of us would be doing that. I had been fired and stripped of access. And the CEO? Richard Pierce had not stepped foot into the engineering wing in over a year. He was too busy playing golf with investors and letting his son run the place into the ground. The protocol began counting the moment my admin permissions were revoked. At 12:02 p.m., the system quietly entered its observation phase. From the outside, everything looked normal. Terminals responded, dashboards updated, data flowed like usual. But under the surface, the Citadel core was monitoring every transaction, logging unauthorized actions, and preparing to isolate key functions. There were no pop-up warnings, no red flashing lights, just silence and a hidden clock ticking towards 6:01 p.m. Anyone paying close attention to system latency might have noticed a few extra milliseconds of lag, but Jordan Pierce was not the type to notice anything that subtle. At that exact moment, he was probably back in his office, tapping his phone while his assistant measured spaces for a new wall-mounted slogan. Something ridiculous like, "Innovate or evaporate" in bright yellow cursive. Jordan loved those phrases. He had never run a product cycle in his life, but he loved the sound of buzzwords. Every time he said agility, it sounded like he thought he had just invented the concept. He threw words around like disruption, velocity, and synergy, as if saying them louder made him smarter. In his world, actual systems did not matter. Only the image did. I did not expect him to catch the warning signs. He did not understand the back end, and he had fired anyone who did. He believed that removing friction meant removing people who told him no. And to be honest, part of me was relieved. Not because I wanted to see Voltrix fail, but because I was tired of carrying a company that no longer respected what held it together. The 6-hour countdown was like a quiet farewell, a final moment of truth between what was real and what was performative. I knew what was coming. He did not. From my apartment window, the city looked calm. I made myself a cup of tea, checked in on a few job listings out of habit, and watched the storm clouds that had passed over earlier drift out toward the mountains. I was not angry. I was not even sad anymore. The only thing I felt was clarity. I had given Voltrix more than a decade of my life. I had stayed through budget cuts, bad leadership, and endless pivots. And in the end, I was discarded because someone wanted to make a splash without getting wet. The Citadel lock was not revenge. It was the natural conclusion of arrogance meeting reality. Around 2:00 p.m., I received a message from one of my old team leads, Erica Monroe, 31, brilliant and sharp enough to see what others missed. She wrote, "Hey, Rachel, something's weird with the deployment logs. Did you touch anything on the back end before they cut your access?" I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, "Nope, not a thing, but stay alert." I did not say more. Erica would figure it out soon enough, and she deserved the chance to stay clear if things went sideways. She was one of the few good ones left in that building. By 3:30 p.m., the system would have begun escalating its internal checks. Network nodes would start cross-validating access chains, scanning for unauthorized pings, and preparing to lock into read-only mode. If anyone at Voltrix had been watching the right dashboards, they might have noticed the shift. But I knew they were not. They were probably too busy drafting press releases or planning some flashy product announcement. That was Jordan's world. A surface-level performance with no depth behind it. And so the clock ticked on. 5 hours left, then 4, then 3. Every passing minute drew them closer to the moment they would realize something was very, very wrong. But by then, the system would no longer be listening to them. It would be following the rules they never knew existed. Rules I wrote to make sure no one could burn the house down just because they inherited the keys. And Jordan? He was still celebrating, still oblivious, still rearranging furniture while the foundation crumbled beneath him. As I packed up the last of my things, I heard the news through a whisper in the hallway. Jordan had not stopped with me. He had gone further. The entire cybersecurity audit team. Gone. Just like that. Fired within the hour. No notice, no explanation. People who had spent years protecting the integrity of our systems were shown the door with the same smug arrogance he used on me. And who did he replace them with? Bryce Whitaker, 28 years old, Jordan's former frat brother from some overpriced business school in California. A guy whose biggest accomplishment was a Shopify store that sold t-shirts with hustle printed across the chest, and a resume that looked like a bad LinkedIn meme. I remember Bryce from a few company parties. He once asked me if servers could feel stress during peak traffic, and I thought he was joking. He was not. Bryce had no technical background. His job before this was running influencer marketing campaigns for a travel app that no longer exists. But to Jordan, he was perfect. Someone who would say yes to anything. Someone who would not question a single decision. Bryce was not hired to protect the company. He was hired to protect Jordan's ego. I left the office without a single word. I did not slam doors or make a scene. That would have given them the satisfaction of thinking they had rattled me. Instead, I walked out slowly, calmly, like someone who already knew how the story would end. Because I did. Every file they touched, every deployment they pushed, every change they authorized, my system was watching. Silently, carefully. The Citadel lock was built to observe before it reacted. And now, it was observing a team of amateurs dismantling the most sensitive infrastructure in the company with the care of toddlers playing with fireworks. Jordan had no idea that his every move was being logged. The protocol did not just track unauthorized access. It mapped the entire chain of commands, who issued them, when, and from where. Every time Bryce bypassed a multi-factor authorization or tried to push a live update without peer review, the system recorded it. It also flagged it. The more violations, the faster the countdown moved toward isolation. By the time they realized something was wrong, the system would already be sealing itself off from further damage. I was not sabotaging anything. I was just letting the code do what it was designed to do, protect itself from ignorance. It amazed me how fast one person could unravel years of careful work. Jordan thought innovation meant tearing down what was already working and replacing it with slogans and ego. In less than 3 hours, he had eliminated decades of institutional knowledge, gutted our security layers, and handed over admin rights to someone who once confused a firewall with an antivirus program. But what really stunned me was how no one stopped him. The board was silent. The CEO was absent. Everyone with the power to say no had chosen to look away, either out of fear or convenience. That was the true danger. Not just incompetence, but the silence that let it grow. I got a message around 3 p.m. from another colleague, Noah, our cloud infrastructure lead. He said, Bryce just overrode the TLS certs and pushed a rollback without staging. Something is off. I wanted to tell him everything, to warn him, to help him prepare, but I could not. If I stepped in now, the Citadel lock would interpret it as external interference. I had to stay out of the system completely. It was painful to watch something I helped build begin to shake under the weight of such reckless hands. But I reminded myself, this was the moment it was designed for. By now, the dominoes had already started to fall. Jordan thought he had asserted control, but what he had really done was light a slow-burning fuse. He had cleared the room of the only people who could stop the fire, and he handed the matches to someone who thought cybersecurity meant changing your password to include an exclamation mark. Meanwhile, the system was listening, logging, counting, and preparing. At exactly 4:17 p.m., my phone lit up with Jordan's name. I let it ring. I watched the screen until it went dark again. No voicemail, no message, just silence. That was the first sign he knew something was wrong. The confidence he had earlier, the smugness, the arrogance, all of it had started to crack. Maybe he had finally noticed the missing data streams. Maybe a system that should have taken seconds to load was suddenly frozen. Or maybe someone in engineering had finally said the words he had not wanted to hear. We cannot access the root servers. I poured myself a glass of water and went back to the article I was reading. A piece about disaster-proof systems and how companies lose millions when they fail to document transitions. The irony was sharp enough to make me smile. Jordan was not sorry. He was scared, and fear never brings truth. It only brings desperation. At 4:48 p.m., the second call came in. This time he left a voicemail. His voice was high-pitched, rushed. I could hear background noise, maybe raised voices, maybe his assistant scrambling to Google Solutions. He said, Rachel, hey, we had a hiccup. Nothing major, just some weird system flags. Listen, we really need you back, even just as a short-term consultant. I can get a $20,000 bonus approved right now. Oh, also, we are thinking of creating a future innovation board, and I want you on it. We can make this work. Call me back, please. I stared at my phone and played the message again, just to hear the panic hiding under his forced smile. He was not calling because he respected me. He was calling because the house was on fire, and he finally realized I was the one who knew where the water was. What struck me most was how fast his tone had shifted, from smug and dismissive at lunch to pleading before sunset. That was the thing about people like Jordan. They only valued you when you were useful to them. Once the utility faded, so did the respect. But now I was useful again, desperately so. At 5:12 p.m., the next message came in, this time from Richard Pierce himself, the CEO, 61 years old, semi-retired, and barely involved in the company outside of quarterly calls and occasional interviews. His voice was low, tired, and full of something Jordan's never carried: regret. "Rachel, this is Richard. I just got a report from Systems Security. They mentioned something called Citadel. Is that something you implemented? We need to talk. Call me back as soon as possible." That was the moment he finally understood. The failsafe he had once approved, the security measure he had agreed to fund without asking too many questions, was now staring back at him, and he no longer had the means to control it. But it was too late. The timer had already moved past the 4-hour mark. The system had detected multiple unauthorized deployments, invalid credential attempts, and critical infrastructure changes made without validation. It had logged over 100 breaches. Every single one was a nail in the coffin of access. The countdown was no longer reversible. Even if I had wanted to help, which by then I did not, I could not have stopped it. The Citadel lock had entered its final phase. At 6:01 p.m., it would execute a full containment lockdown. No new code could be pushed, no data could be migrated. The system would shut itself off from all outside interference, and only one person knew exactly how far the consequences would go. I thought about calling Richard back, just to hear his voice and remind him what it felt like to have someone in the company who actually knew what they were doing. But I decided against it. He had made his choice. He had handed the keys to his son and walked away, assuming everything would be fine. And when it was not, he came crawling back to the person he allowed to be discarded like a piece of outdated equipment. I owed him nothing. So I let the call sit unanswered. I let the clock keep ticking. I had nothing left to give that company, and they had nothing left to stop what was already coming. At exactly 5:30 p.m., I heard a knock at my apartment door. Not a soft one either. It was quick, nervous, and repeated. I knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. Jordan Pierce, standing there on my front step, completely out of place in his designer jacket and slicked-back panic. In one hand, he held a bouquet of overpriced flowers. In the other, a manila envelope. I opened the door just wide enough to let the evening air in, but not him. His smile was tight, like someone trying to hold back fear behind a script he had not rehearsed enough. He started with my name like it was a question. "Rachel?" Then he held out the flowers. "I know today was rough, but I know we can fix this. Together. Just, let's talk. We put something together. A new position for you. A transition, not a termination." He handed me the envelope. I flipped it open and saw the first line of the pre-written press release. Rachel Keller will be transitioning into a senior advisory role as part of Voltrix Systems' evolving leadership strategy. I did not even finish reading it. Beneath that was a non-disclosure agreement, already highlighted where they wanted me to sign. He kept talking, tripping over his words. "We are just in a weird moment. People are confused, but if we show unity, if we tell the world this was always part of the plan, they will believe it. The board will calm down. The investors will relax. We can reset together. I mean, you built the thing, right? So, we just need your help to pause it. You get your role back. Even more. Equity. A seat at the table. You deserve it." I let him speak until he ran out of breath. His voice cracked near the end, right when he said the word deserve, like he finally realized what that meant. But it was not an apology. It was survival. His eyes were not filled with guilt. They were filled with dread. He did not want me back because he respected me. He wanted me back because he knew the clock was about to hit 0, and he had nowhere left to turn. I looked at him, this man who had fired me in front of my own team just 5 hours earlier, and I asked one question. "Do you even know how many authentication layers your own servers have?" He blinked, once, twice, then shook his head like he thought it was a trick question. It was not. It was a test, one that told me everything I needed to know. I handed him the envelope back, still unsigned. I did not raise my voice. I did not explain anything. I just said, "Go home, Jordan." Then I shut the door. I stood there for a moment, listening to his footsteps fade. The bouquet still lay at my feet, a weak gesture from someone who thought flowers could patch over disrespect. I left them on the floor. I went back to my desk, sat down, and looked at the time. 5:37 p.m., 24 minutes left. The system was already in phase 3 of the lockdown protocol. Admin sessions were being severed, internal logs were compressing for secure transfer, and the root database had switched to a mirrored view only I could decrypt, assuming I ever wanted to, which I did not. I thought about what he said. We can fix this together. But there was no we anymore. There never had been. There had been me, my years, my sweat, my weekends, my late nights. And when I became inconvenient, he replaced me with someone who thought security keys were something you could reset through customer support. That was not a partnership. That was exploitation wearing a costume of collaboration. So no, I did not take the deal. I did not sign the NDA. And I did not pretend to be part of a plan I was never consulted on. Because this was not a transition. This was a reckoning. And when the clock struck 6:01 p.m., I wanted to be exactly where I was, at peace, in my own home, while the system did what it was always designed to do, respond with truth when no one else would. At exactly 6:01 p.m., the Citadel lock completed its final sequence. There was no sound, no flashing lights, no dramatic explosion. Just silence. Then, one by one, every major system inside Voltrix systems stopped. First, it was the client dashboards. Screens froze mid-refresh, stuck on spinning loaders. Then the backend processors stalled. Shipment routing halted. Real-time tracking feeds went dark. Partner platforms that relied on our API got kicked out with a 403 unauthorized message. Every server node tried to ping the next for backup, but they all ran into the same wall. The system they thought they controlled no longer recognized them. The headquarters was probably filled with shouting. People refreshing monitors, unplugging machines, calling IT. But none of it would work. I had built it that way. The fallback systems had to pass through the Citadel core for authentication. And that core had one rule: breach equals lockout. When they removed me without proper procedure, when they shut off my access without the dual key protocol, they triggered the lockdown timer. They had 6 hours to correct it, 6 hours to realize the mistake. But instead, they fired my entire cybersecurity team and tried to patch the system with ego and duct tape. It was not just sloppy, it was suicidal. I had coded every block, every conditional failsafe, every dead-end path. I made sure nothing would be restored without full integrity confirmation. They thought they could bypass it with admin overrides. But the admin accounts were only mirrors, ghost shells with no true root power. The real controls were sealed behind biometric and token layers that Jordan did not even know existed, layers his so-called replacement team had no hope of navigating. They were stuck in a house with no keys and no exits. At 6:02 p.m., the main command screen in Voltrix's control center flickered once and went black. The only thing left was a message in the middle of the screen. Plain white text on a dark background. No sound, no animation. Just 10 simple words. Integrity over inheritance. Shutdown authorized. No signature, no threat. Just a final verdict. I imagined the room falling silent, phones vibrating with urgent calls from logistics partners, executives refreshing stock apps as the numbers turned red. Someone probably spilled a coffee cup trying to reboot a dead terminal. Meanwhile, I sat in my apartment, the evening breeze coming through the open window, listening to the world slow down for just a moment. It was not revenge, not in the traditional sense. It was something cleaner, something earned. A system holding the line when no one else would. Jordan probably stared at that message and did not even understand what it meant. Integrity over inheritance. It was something I had said once in a meeting years ago, back when I still believed in the company, when I thought we were building something to outlast all of us. I wrote it into the source code as a quiet reminder, just in case someone ever tried to take shortcuts with power they did not understand. That phrase had been buried deep in the shutdown script, never meant to appear unless the worst happened. But today was that day. And now, Voltrix was down. Not just slowed, not just limping, fully down. Millions of dollars in shipment contracts were frozen. Defense schedules interrupted. Private data flows halted mid-transfer. Every alert was logged, every breach recorded. There was nothing left for them to spin or disguise. The integrity check had failed. The system did not crash. It chose not to continue. I did not smile. I did not celebrate. I just sat still, breathing in the moment, because I knew the calls were coming. the lawyers, the investors, the federal agencies, and maybe even the media. But for now, all I felt was a deep, steady calm. I had done my job, not just as a builder, but as a protector. The system had worked, the lock had held, and the people who thought they could cheat the blueprint finally realized. Some foundations do not forgive. By the time the sun came up the next morning, Voltrix's empire had started to burn. The stock opened down 31%, and within the first 2 hours of trading, it slipped another 17%. Headlines moved faster than facts, but it did not matter. The world could see something had gone terribly wrong. 2 key federal contracts were officially suspended before lunch, not under review, not temporarily delayed, suspended. That word sent chills through every investor holding on to Voltrix shares, hoping the crash would bottom out before it became a total collapse. Jordan resigned around 3:00 p.m. At least that is what the press statement said. Voluntary transition to explore future opportunities. His publicist tried to paint it as a graceful exit, something about stepping back to reflect on the next chapter. But inside the company, people knew better. That same morning, the board had called for an emergency session. The moment the audit logs from the shutdown were decrypted and reviewed, it became clear who had been asleep at the wheel. Jordan was not just careless, he had been criminally negligent. And worse, he had surrounded himself with people who would never dare question him. Bryce, the golden boy with a Shopify resume, vanished. No press quotes, no LinkedIn updates, just gone. Someone claimed they saw him catching a red-eye out of state, clutching a backpack and avoiding eye contact. Others said he was staying with family off the grid. I did not care. He was a symptom, not the cause, a placeholder in a game he did not understand. But the damage he helped trigger was very, very real. Richard Pierce, the CEO, was hospitalized by late afternoon. The press called it a stress episode. That was the polite term. Insiders said he collapsed during a board briefing when the lead auditor showed him the root logs. He had finally realized the full cost of replacing accountability with loyalty. He had bet everything on Jordan, the company, the mission, the legacy. And now that legacy was bleeding in front of the entire world, the board of directors wasted no time. They ordered a full independent audit of every operational, financial, and security process inside the company. The results came out 2 weeks later, but I had already guessed what they would say. Systemic negligence, executive overreach, improper access to sensitive infrastructure, disregard for internal security protocols. The final conclusion was clear. Systemic negligence enabled executive misconduct. It was damning. But it was also carefully written. No names were attached to the line items. No one pointed fingers at me. And that, I realized, was intentional. They did not want the world to know who built the lock. They wanted the story to end here in boardrooms and press releases, not in interviews, not in court. I had done what their in-house teams never could, protect the system, even from them. And they knew going public with my name would only raise more questions. Questions they were not ready to answer. I stayed silent. I did not post online. I did not give quotes to journalists. I did not return any of the 10 or so messages I got from mutual contacts still inside Voltrix. There was no need. The message had already been sent, not by me, but by the system itself, a digital monument to integrity in a world that had forgotten what that meant. They could rebuild the company, maybe even recover some of their losses, but they would never undo what had been done, and they would never again be able to pretend that recklessness had no consequences. In the end, that was enough for me. The story would never carry my name. The headlines would not call me a whistleblower or a genius or a traitor. I was just a ghost in the machine, one who had drawn a line, locked the door, and left them to sit in the dark. They could spin the aftermath any way they wanted, but deep down, every one of them would remember exactly who held the final key. 3 days after Voltrix went dark, I received a call I had almost forgotten to expect. It was from Lumion Tech, a logistics firm based out of Zurich that had spent the last 4 years trying to get me on board. They were not as loud as Voltrix, but they were smart, quietly building better tools, tighter networks, stronger infrastructure. Their CTO, Amelia Romer, called me directly. Her voice was calm, professional, but carried a note of urgency. She had read the news, of course, everyone had, but she did not ask for details. She simply said, We have an offer, and this time we are not playing around. The numbers were more than fair. $540,000 a year, plus performance bonuses, full creative control. I could build, redesign, or throw away anything I wanted. No politics, no corporate babysitting. And they would relocate me to Switzerland or any Lumion hub I preferred. Everything was on the table: housing, legal assistance, even private schooling if I needed it. I stared at the offer for a long time before I replied. My hands were steady, but my chest was tight. Not from fear, from clarity. This was not just a job. This was an escape route that did not feel like running. I told Amelia I would accept, but only on one condition. I wanted my team. The same cybersecurity unit Jordan fired without notice. No severance, no thank you. Just a mass email and a revoked badge. I wanted all of them brought on, with titles and pay reflecting what they should have been making all along. No contracts until they each approved their own. Amelia paused for a few seconds, then said, "Done." No back and forth, no negotiations. She knew talent when she saw it, and more importantly, she trusted the people I trusted. Within 72 hours, my entire team had offers in hand. I made a few calls to reconnect everyone. Some were hesitant. They had started to settle elsewhere or had been burned too badly to think straight. But when I explained what Lumion was offering, most of them said yes before I even finished the sentence. They were not just signing onto a company. They were signing onto a second chance, a clean slate, a place where competence mattered more than connections, and no one got fired because a founder needed to flex his ego. Lumion flew us out for onboarding and integration, first class, no shortcuts. We were greeted not with corporate slogans, but with questions, smart ones. How would we handle hybrid shipping grids? What AI layers had we used for anomaly detection? What did we think of their custom blockchain validation tool? For the first time in months, I felt like I was speaking the right language again. Not branding, not spin, just problems and how to solve them. My team snapped into action like a muscle that had been waiting too long to move. Ideas flew faster than we could write them down. They gave me an entire division to lead. Not a side project, not a sandbox, a core unit. And when I laid out my blueprint, they let it breathe. No edits, no micromanaging, just support. It was almost unnerving. How different it felt from Voltrix. No one was checking my calendar just to schedule meaningless check-ins. No one was lurking behind me waiting to take credit. And when something went right, it was shared. When something went wrong, it was fixed. No scapegoats, no spin rooms, just grown adults doing serious work. By the end of the first week, I had a new badge, a new office, a new rhythm. But more than that, I had something that had been taken from me at Voltrix: control. Not just over code or systems, but over how I spent my energy, who I worked with, what I stood for. It was not revenge, it was restoration, a rebuilding of trust, team, and purpose. We never talked about the shutdown, not openly. It was understood, though. A shared lesson burned into all of us. The past had collapsed, but the future was already under construction. This time we were building it our way. 3 months had passed since Voltrix went silent. The world had moved on, at least on the surface. New logistics startups rose from the ashes. Think pieces flooded LinkedIn about leadership accountability and ethical restructuring. Jordan's name popped up in a few clickbait headlines, but quickly faded from public memory. The same could not be said for the system he once claimed to have built. It was still down. Even with millions funneled into consultants and crisis firms, no one had managed to reboot it. There was a reason for that, a reason that had been written into the code years before any of them knew what I was really building. One quiet Wednesday morning, a story broke on a mid-sized tech blog called Infrastructure Weekly. It was not a flashy outlet, but it had teeth. The article was short, clinical, and absolutely devastating. It reported that the core intellectual property behind Voltrix's orchestration engine, the software that managed its logistics, automated its routing, and secured its internal data, was not actually owned by Voltrix. Instead, the legal rights had been transferred in 2017 to a dormant Nevada-based LLC called Equinox Routing Partners. That LLC, the article revealed, was registered under the name Dana Keller. My sister, my blood, 39 years old, Harvard Law, quiet, sharp, and completely invisible to the tech scene. What the blog did not know, but hinted at, was that Dana and I had been planning that move for years. Back in 2017, Jordan had insisted on a massive rebrand, spent nearly $2 million on a failed Super Bowl ad campaign, all while ignoring the technical debt that was sinking the company's spine. While he was busy rewriting taglines, I was rewriting the actual engine. But this time, I did it under a separate architecture license, one that allowed me to reassign authorship. So I gave it to Dina. On paper, she became the legal creator of the orchestration logic. No conflict, no clause violated. Just quiet, lawful protection of what I knew might one day be taken from me. The blog's headline caught fire within hours. She built it, they broke it. Now she owns it. It spread faster than anything Voltrix's PR team had ever pushed. Investors started digging. So did regulators. And within 2 days, a legal team representing Dina made a public statement. Voltrix had forfeited use rights the moment it lost access to the live deployment logs that were, per the code, tied to a dormant licensing beacon. And that beacon, it had expired the moment Citadel Lock went live. It was not revenge. It was defense. A legal firewall wrapped around years of stolen credit, watered-down authority, and performative leadership. Jordan never responded publicly. He could not. His non-disclosure agreement was airtight, and even if it had not been, there was little he could say without admitting he never understood the thing he was pretending to lead. Bryce was still missing in action. Last I heard, he had quietly relocated to South America under a different name. Richard? He retired early, citing ongoing health concerns. Voltrix's board was gutted, and a new entity had started the process of splitting the remaining IP into fragments for liquidation. None of them reached out, not even through lawyers. I was not surprised. When people build on sand, they tend to disappear when the tide rises. I did not celebrate. I did not post a thread. I did not write a think piece. There was nothing to say that had not already been made clear. My sister, Dana, continued managing the LLC as a holding entity. She licensed the orchestration engine, on our terms, to select companies that respected the work. The money flowed in, sure, but that was not the reward. The real reward was knowing the foundation I built did not vanish into some corporate black hole. It lived on, protected, earning, quietly defying the arrogance that tried to erase it. I never sought revenge. That was never the goal. What I did was simple. I protected what I built. I made sure that the hours, the years, the late nights of designing, debugging, fixing, and perfecting would not be swallowed by ego and incompetence. Because in the end, empires do not fall because of some external enemy. They fall from within, when people inherit what they do not understand, then break it while pretending to lead. That is what happened to Voltrix. It was never mine to destroy. It was theirs. I just made sure they could not take credit when it crumbled.